The US says it will not destroy its chemical weapons by 2012 as required by an international convention. Will that mean Washington is going to be referred to the UN Security Council? Stay with News Analysis as we discuss why concerns are growing about the threats posed by the world's largest manufacturer and supplier of weapons of mass destruction.
The International Conference of OPCW is the final meeting before the final deadline for the dismantling of all chemical weapons. In advance of the meeting, the United States announced it plans to keep its arsenal of chemical weapons for many years to come. It is reportedly seeking to extend by a decade the April 2012 deadline, which obliges state signatories to the CWC to dismantle their chemical weapons.
In accordance with the convention, we have two phases. The first phase is 10 years, as you have said, by 29 April 2007. And in the convention, it stipulates that if this deadline of 10 years is not observed, so the Conference of States Parties and Executive Council, they can discuss the issue upon the request of possessor states to extend another 5 years. So that's the final extended deadline. Actually, reality is existing. The reality is that the chemical weapons are existing after 29 April 2012. The convention is very clear that if this deadline is not met, the obligation of complete destruction remains valid.
During its recent history, the US has possessed three types of weapons of mass destruction: chemical, nuclear, and biological. In 1980s, when former dictator Saddam Hussein was ruling Iraq, Washington and some of its allies supplied the country with chemical weapons, which were used against Iran. Over 130 civilians were killed and thousands more were chemically wounded in Iran's northwestern city of Sardasht. The US is estimated to possess 20,000 tons of chemical agents, including nerve and mustard gas precursors. The US is the only country to have used nuclear weapons in combat. In 2010, the Pentagon disclosed that the current size of its nuclear arsenal is a total of 5,113 warheads. The figure does not include the estimated 4,600 warheads that have been retired and scheduled for dismantlement. The US further plans to improve its nuclear arsenal by developing smaller but more effective weapons. The Obama administration initially sought an increase of $600 million for its nuclear weapons program in its proposed 2011 budget. That would raise annual spending on nuclear arms to almost $7 billion. Apart from chemical and nuclear weapons, the United States has also used depleted uranium. NATO and US forces used the toxic material during their bombing of former Yugoslavia in 1999 and the Second Persian Gulf War in Iraq, especially in the city of Fallujah. Cluster bombs are another deadly weapon used by the US in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War and in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Pentagon justifies the use of cluster bombs, saying, quote, "They provide distinct advantages against a range of targets." If cluster bombs are banned, the US alone would have to give up the use of 2 million of them and about 100 million submunitions or smaller bomblets. Now, with the deadline of April 2012 fast approaching for dismantlement of chemical arms around the world, Washington, the biggest violator of Chemical Weapons Convention, is still refusing to scrap its unconventional weapons. Opponents say this is Washington's delaying tactic to buy time so that someday it can totally abandon the binding international convention and retain its lethal weapons of mass destruction for decades to come.
Well, joining me now live from Birmingham is Peter Eyre, Middle East consultant. Thank you very much for being with us. I'd also like to introduce Jennifer Lowenstein from the Middle East Studies Programme at UW-Madison in Washington with us, and also Senior Editor of Veterans Today, Gordon Duff, who's with us on the line from Ohio. Thank you very much for being with us. I'll put the first question to Jennifer in Washington. Now, the Chemical Weapons Convention had called upon signatory states, Jennifer, including the US, to destroy all stockpiles of banned substances by 2007. Now, Washington got an extension then by 2012. Now, it's seeking another one by 2022. Why does the US want another decade?
Well, I think the real reason has to do with the fact that the United States has no intention of abandoning its chemical weapons arsenal. The United States is the world's most lethal military superpower. It has, as was mentioned, nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons stockpiles. It has used them in its wars in Vietnam, in Iraq on both occasions, and of course it has sold chemical weapons to nations that also use them, such as Israel. By keeping their weapons arsenal, their chemical weapons arsenal, and their other non-conventional weapons arsenals, the United States will maintain its military edge over any other country in the world aspiring to reach some kind of deterrent level in warfare. You know, it's a shame for me to know that the United States is once again refusing to relinquish these deadly, horrific weapons.
Right. Well, the United States has been arguing that it can't produce the budget needed to get rid of these weapons, among other reasons. Now, Gordon Duff, if I can put this question to you, how do you see the arguments that the United States has been putting forward about why it wants another decade?
Well, the issue of not having money to destroy weapons is one that came up with Libya when they became signatory in 2002. We had a WikiLeaks cable that came out about 18 months ago that described essentially how Libya wanted to hold on to its facilities and even built a new facility in 2006. Well, this week it was announced that 2 new plants have been discovered, and rather than just being mustard gas and precursors in Libya, they're finding, of course, sarin and VX and other far more deadly things. I agree with Ms. Lowenstein entirely. The U.S. has an unusual history. I mean, the biggest use of chemical weapons ever, the most lethal use in history, was in Vietnam, and not just the uses of sarin gas and other but Agent Orange itself is causing millions of birth defects in Vietnam, which is a dioxin-laced defoliant, but eventually ended up killing as many as 400,000 Americans over the last 50 years have died from diseases related to being poisoned by dioxin in these chemicals. The other history the U.S. has, of course, is in the Gulf War. It isn't just a history of the use of weapons. It's a history of the denial of being caught. Veterans from the Gulf War have died by the tens of thousands. It's being kept secret. Our organization works with regularly in tracking not just the fact that the U.S. has done this, but that the U.S. continues to lie.
Right,
as Chris Busby had reported earlier, and excuse me for running over on this.
Yeah, it's okay, well, Gordon, but I just want to point out that, of course, a criticism that has been raised in the conference this year was the fact that it's not just about the U.S. scrapping its non-conventional weapons, it's also criticism about the U.S. not being committed not to use those weapons. It's been using them, and you've been giving us the examples and instances there. Let's just go over to Birmingham now and speak to Peter Eyre about this as well. Peter, how will extending this deadline by another decade change anything now? And first of all, when we are speaking about the deadline set 2012, do you think that deadline was realistic, has been realistic, and that this is a delaying tactic, as some opponents have been saying, by Washington not to adhere to that deadline?
Well, the deadline obviously is very realistic. There's no reason at all why that cannot be achieved. But you've got to understand they have no intention of following like the NPT, which is the weapons of mass destruction, which chemical and biological warfare comes under. Look at the history. Take Iraq, for instance, the United States, the United Kingdom, and many countries across Europe, Scandinavia and Japan were behind providing Iraq, Saddam Hussein, with chemical and biological warfare. Halabja is a classic example where VX, we believe, was used there, and that was also used in the Iraq-Iran war. And who provided those ingredients? Primarily the US, and here in the UK, we actually paid for the laboratories to be established and helped them produce that. So the whole scenario of the NPT treaty and chemical and biological warfare is really a non-event.
Right, and in Washington, Jennifer, another question now, before we step into the issue of why these weapons have been used and if they're still being used. First of all, what do you think should be the punitive measures now when we are speaking about this international convention? Now, we know that according to the Convention on Chemical Weapons, if there's non-compliance, there should be a referral to the UN Security Council. Is the United States going to be referred to the UN Security Council? Are we going to see discrimination?